Sometimes it feels like we're just little boats adrift upon a sea where every game is a little bit different, but also kind of very much the same. So whenever a game this visually striking comes out, I've gotta get a closer look at it, and especially this one because the vibes are right up my alley. This is the Sea of Remnants. It's a turn-based live service game about pirates, and it's absolutely dripping with personality. I mean, just look at these characters. Now, I was fortunate enough to get a chance to play the alpha release this past week, so I'd like to share my thoughts with all of you. But before I do that, I just need to let you know, if you're new here, that this channel mostly focuses on story, lore, and world building. So my coverage of the combat for Sea of Remnants is probably going to be a little bit light here. And the second thing I want to remind you all of is that this game is in alpha testing. That means the game is really early in its development cycle, and there's still plenty of quirks and kinks and little wrinkles to work out before the game is officially ready for release. Do keep this in mind throughout the rest of the video as you're looking at the footage that I took of my playthrough, because what I have played through is not 100% indicative of the final product. So with all that in mind, let's start things off by talking about the premise of the game. As the player, you are a little wooden doll that's been set adrift on the vast waters known only as the Sea of Remnants. After getting caught up in a tidal wave, you wash up on the shore of Orbtopia, also known as Port Op. Everything that falls into the Sea of Remnants winds up here, but you are a little bit unique, as you have, drumroll please, lost your memory, which is apparently unusual for these parts. People fall into the water and get washed up on shore so often that it's somebody's job to go around and pick people up and bring them back to town. And most of them don't lose their memory. And on top of your memory loss, of course you got injured when your boat capsized. So when you do finally wake up, you find yourself in this guy's workshop. And yes, I said workshop and not doctor's office. You don't need a doctor, you're a wooden doll. And so is everyone else in this game. So a craftsman like this guy is far more useful than a doctor. And while he's fixing you up, you're introduced to one of the more unusual aspects of this game, which is an extensive main character customization screen. I spent way too long looking at every option here, partially because I was not expecting it to be here at all, and partly because there are just a lot of options. You've got 2 genders and a dozen or so base face models, which you can then fine-tune every aspect of, from the spacing of the eyes to the brow lines, mouth position, makeup, and more. And while there aren't too many hair options yet, you do have an infinite amount of colors to choose from, and a pretty respectable amount of options for accessories, hats, and outfits. Now, I highly doubt that this will be the extent of the character customization, even though this is already very extensive. A little bit later in the game, you will unlock a way to revisit this screen. So I think cosmetics for the main character at least will be a pretty big thing. My one disclaimer here is that I don't know if the customization is going to be part of the monetization model of the game. We're just way too early in development for that to be actually in the game yet. But regardless of its status, what I will say is that your choices in your character customization kind of matter. Because your main character shows up exactly the way you customized them in every cutscene and in combat. And maybe I'm just really easily impressed these days, I don't know, but I was really surprised and ecstatic to see exactly how expressive and animated the main character is in spite of all of that customization. I can't tell you how many games I've played that have a static main character model that's just so much less expressive than this one is. And had I known this was going to be the case, I would have made a much crazier model back at the customization screen just to see how they'd look in these cutscenes. But okay, once your body's all fixed up, the early story starts focusing on finding a way to recover your memories and figuring out exactly who you are, because you don't know that either. And your first lead is an unconscious girl who apparently washed up alongside you. In a strange twist of fate, you meet her perfect doppelganger in a tavern shortly after waking up. Now, this awake girl is called RS. Yes, that's her name. It's 2 letters, R.S. Now, RS is delightfully chaotic, and after bonding over a ripped flag, you two go on a couple of adventures together, acquire a new ship, and form a pirate crew so that you can sail the Sea of Remnants and recover your memories, because she's apparently missing hers as well. It's a pretty simple premise for a story, and to be honest, the story itself is currently pretty bare bones, and by that I mean it's very simple and straightforward, but honestly, I don't think that's a bad thing. Not every story needs to be a high fantasy trauma-inducing epic, you know? Sometimes all you want to do is go on silly pirate adventures and chase a compass-stealing chicken around a town of misfit wanderers. But the simplicity of the story doesn't make it any less enjoyable. Like, it does have a lot of really entertaining and comedic moments that I've really enjoyed, but at this point in development, I do feel like those moments were a little bit disconnected from each other. Like, it did feel as though some of the in-between bits were missing, which made for a little bit of a bumpy ride, but I don't really feel like that's too much of a problem right now, if only because this is the alpha test and these are the kinds of weird issues that I would expect at this point in the development cycle. In fact, it might just be part of the dev cycle. It makes sense to me that you would want to hash out your main story beats first and then sort of add the in-betweens later on once you sort of finalize those main points. You know what I mean? So to me, that little bit of disconnection is right up there with localization issues and some assorted smaller bugs. So I'll be looking to reevaluate my assessment of the story during the eventual beta test instead. That said, what I will say is that I don't think most people will pick this game up just for the story. In my experience, the story is more like a through line or an excuse for a fun and wacky adventure. So while it is really fun and entertaining, this game is more about gameplay, so exploration, puzzles, mini games, and little comedic side stories and combat, you know what I mean? And the plus side of that is you're not going to have 6 hours of a visual novel to sit through every 6 weeks. Exploration in this game is interesting. It's like a mix of open world and zone-based exploration, which ties nicely into the world building because each explorable area is its own self-contained island that's separated from the others via the Sea of Remnants. And there's a surprising amount of variety to the islands too. Like, you'll definitely have a ton of tropical sandy beaches, but there's also dark caverns and scenic vistas in the early game, as well as secret doors with roulette-based puzzle platforming challenges and the like. And it wouldn't be a pirate game without a ton of treasure to find, enemies to duel with, and cooking ingredients to collect. And the cooking ingredients are actually really important because as far as I can tell, outside of combat, they are your only method of healing on any given island. I don't think you can get a full heal from the campfire checkpoints or the hamster god statues, so you've gotta collect, cook, and eat your food at the campfire to top up your HP and get your buffs. But before you can explore an island, you gotta get there first, and that means manually sailing your ship through the Sea of Remnants armed only with a half-drawn map and your trusty compass. Now this probably doesn't need saying, but this game's aesthetic really feels like a mix of Nightmare Before Christmas and The Wind Waker, and the latter really makes itself known during these sailing portions. But rest assured, there's far less dead space between islands in the Sea of Remnants. And when there is a bit of a long stretch of sailing to be had, you'll be way too busy firing your cannons at other pirate ships, sea monsters, or very clever wooden monkeys on skiffs, so I doubt you're gonna get bored. Now, one important thing to note is that while this game is technically a turn-based combat game, the ship battles happen in real time instead, so you will have to navigate, dodge, and shoot manually from your ship. I would assume that later on in development they're going to start adding things like ship upgrades with different cannons and crewmates that do different things, but that's kind of speculative. It just seems like they've laid good groundwork for that. And if it's not something they're doing already, put it on my wish list. So the turn-based combat only occurs during land battles where you can command up to 4 crewmates at a time. Now, as I said earlier, I'm not really a combat meta kind of gal, and I do expect the devs to make a lot of changes to the combat system based on player feedback after this alpha test, so do forgive my rather sparse assessment of it. Basically, each character has a normal attack, a defense option, and a few signature combat skills, and an ultimate attack that they can use during their turn, which you can see here in the turn order bar. Once used, these skills go on cooldown for a set number of turns, so getting the timing right is pretty important. From my experience, manipulating the turn order and frequency is going to be a big part of controlling the battle, as both sides have access to a lot of turn order shenanigans, some of which are part of the characters and enemies' kits, and some of which is based on the roll of the dice. Throughout any given battle, you'll be acquiring these points down here, which you can spend to roll one of the hamster's dice. Each dice roll costs 1 point, and you can roll up to 3 dice per character's turn, as long as you have the points available, that is. Now, if your roll is higher than your opponent's roll, then your character will get an extra action. And if it's lower, I think the enemy actually gets an extra action? I could be wrong about that, but that seemed like what was happening. And if it's not what was happening, put that on my wish list as well, because I kind of like this high risk, high reward in a pirate game, because what's more on brand for a pirate than some high stakes gambling during a duel? I love ludonarrative harmony, okay? Now, I didn't have a whole lot of time to go into the character building side of things, but what I can tell you is that you will have the option to enhance your character's body, which is their base stats, and their mind, which is like their individual skill trees, and you do those separately. I don't really know how to articulate my thoughts on this beyond it's a very unique and kind of cool system, but because I couldn't really get past the early game in the time frame I had, I'm unclear on how in-depth this aspect of the game goes. But like I said, the fundamentals are pretty interesting. Also on my list of things I didn't really get to yet, I don't really understand how the gear and equipment works yet. So I'm gonna withhold any comments on it beyond saying that they appear to be tied to collecting treasure and or exploration. And it feels a little bit roguelike, but I'm just not really sure what the conditions are. But to be honest, a lot of the island exploration aspects do feel a little bit roguelike. Like I would definitely be willing to compare every exploration attempt on an island to a run in a roguelike. Because just like in a roguelike, if you die, you can lose all of your stuff. And by that I mean mostly treasure. And like this is a pirate game, so collecting treasure in general is a pretty huge part of the game. So if you go to the island and collect all the treasure and then you die, you don't get to keep your treasure. You gotta go get it again. Unless you had the foresight to ship your treasure back to Port Op via a special shipping company before you died. But like even if you don't die on the island, you still have to like sail back to Port Op. And chances are while sailing back, you're gonna have another encounter with like a sea monster or another pirate ship, and if you lose that fight, you still lose your treasure. So I guess what I'm saying is make good use of the shipping company. They're very useful. Overall, though, I had a really good time playing this early build. In my personal opinion, the art direction of this game is absolutely phenomenal and definitely its strongest feature. I find the idea that everyone in this game is a wooden doll and is aware that they're a wooden doll to be a fascinating concept, and the character designs are a very refreshing departure from the big booba waifu trope that dominates this genre. Which isn't to say that there are no waifu-like characters, just that they're very different from the norm in a way that I actually really appreciate. I think the weakest aspect of this game at this stage in development is the turn-based combat, which is totally expected. Turn-based games are pretty hard to design if your goal is to hold the player's interest for long periods of time, so I think that while the bones of the combat system are really solid, the combat is still missing some kind of unique strategic element to keep battles from going stale too quickly, which is one of the reasons why I'm advocating for the high risk, high reward of the dice. That might not fix the problem, it might just be too much RNG, but I do think there needs to be some kind of additional element to really make this combat system sing, you know? My one disclaimer here is that I did not get far enough in the game to see what kind of end game Sea of Remnants has available in the time that I had to test it out, so do take this opinion of mine with a grain of salt. These are just my first impressions, and I was basically just an early game. And I think the only noteworthy thing I have left to say is that the game actually runs pretty well on a lower end machine. I tested it on a pretty basic computer with only 16 gigs of RAM and a mid-range graphics card, and I really had no issues on full quality. Which is great to see because this is the worst that the game's ever gonna run, as the devs are going to inevitably add performance optimizations and polish up the visuals as they work towards the next beta test. So in my eyes, that's a big plus for folks with lower end devices. And I think that's all I have to share for right now. I'm looking forward to seeing how this game evolves from here, so thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Take care of yourselves, and bye-bye for now.